Please put your hands together and welcome AKQA's Executive Creative Director, Mr. Eric Cruz.
Hi everybody, I'm Eric. Very nice to be here. Okay, so first of all, hello, ni hao, and namaste. It's a very honor for me to be here with you guys today in a part of Asia that I don't often come to, but really wish I could be more a part of. So I wanted to begin by asking all of you guys, how many of us have seen the future? If you could raise your hand. 2 people have seen the future. Great. This is a future that happened 12 years ago here in this part of the world.
You could see forming up from left to right a beautiful crescent on the horizon. It looked quite lovely. We were spellbound, everybody was looking at it. But at that time there was no way to know how big the wave was.
ครับผมขึ้นมันจะใหญ่ขึ้นเรื่อยๆฮะ
Die brechen da hinten, und die Wellen, die brechen da hinten auch heftig, oder? Alter Schwede.
I filmed the scene again and again.
Was ist das?
I was in a special way fascinated about it.
Guck mal da hinten, Schnicki, wie das hochpescht. Das Wasser.
I said to myself, hey, what a perfect wave.
Hammer. Was da hinten abgeht. Nein. Aber da hinten, da geht, das ist ja Wahnsinn. Das ist richtig.
ผมรบกวนแจ้งแขกอย่างด่วนนะครับตอนนี้มี
The tsunami of the future is something that happened about 12 years ago here in this part of the world, coming from the Indian Ocean and wiping straight into Thailand itself. It's a perfect metaphor for the future, which is scary, baffling, and unpredictable. There is a world that is changing, transforming, evolving, coming in like a tsunami. For many of us, this future is fast approaching. We've heard about it. We know it's inevitable. But for most of us, the future is something we can't yet see, or simply something we don't know what to do with. And for some of us, The future has already arrived. The world we were born in is different than the world we live in today. We are living in what is perhaps the most creative moment in history, the age of innovation. Many companies and industries will die as a result of irrelevance. Yet there is still very much a fear of change. The good thing is, new ideas are changing the world. And what this means is, creative people, you all in this audience, can now lead the human evolution, the creation of our next world. The question for all of us here today is, are we Asians creative enough to invent our own future? I wanted to share with you a chat message that I got from Facebook from one of my creative directors who asked me, why does America have so many innovators, whether it's Apple, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Amazon? What he was really asking is, are Asians less creative than the West? That's really the bigger question. The artist Pablo Picasso is famous for saying that all children are artists, and that the problem is, when we grow up, somehow we let go of being an artist. Somehow we unlearn how to be creative, how to imagine. Whether it's through duty, practicality, our own security, or even expected paths of what our parents expect us to do. So why don't we Asians play enough? Why don't we take more risks? But it wasn't always this way. In China, about 4,000 years ago, they invented this thing called the abacus, one of the very first human calculators, a forerunner to computing. 3,000 years ago, China was actually known as the Silicon Valley of the world, inventing things such as paper, ink, money, calculators, playing cards, gunpowder, and some even say football, as contentious as that may be. But there's a great shift that's happening in Asia, shifting from a manufacturing and producing side of the world into consumers. But at the same time, there's also a very big stigma that follows us no matter where we go, anywhere in the world, and that is the stigma of being fast followers and not necessarily inventors and innovators. When I was in Tokyo, I would walk to work every day, right, to this place called White and Kennedy, and I would pass through this place called the Human Music College. And I always found it interesting that some Japanese kids would have a backpack and put their electric guitars, right? So they would basically go to a college to learn how to rock out, right? Which struck me really, really odd coming from the US. Why? Because in the US, most anyone who learns how to rock teaches themselves. They simply just do it. They didn't need to go to a college to actually learn how to play music. They did it themselves. So the question is Asia poised to follow or to innovate? But what's really stopping us? Well, there's a couple of factors, and these are some observations I have towards barriers for us Asians. And a lot of the examples you'll see here are more sort of the East Asian examples, but I think some of it really quite relates also to this part of the world. The first is a kind of social system, a kind of philosophy. And what that means is most of East Asia is very much guided by Confucian hierarchy, right? Whether it's in China, Korea, or Japan. This idea that old wisdom and knowledge trumps curiosity and new thinking, whereas in the West, it's the other way around. Young people are redefining the world. I ran across this chart. It's a very old chart dating back 120 years back or so. It's Japan's feudal system. And if you look at it, they plot the creative class in the bottom of the hierarchy, in the bottom of the pyramid. Below the emperor, the shogun, the samurai, even the peasants is where the artisan sits. But today's chart is flipped all the way up above, where the creatives and the innovators sit above governments and corporations. The creative class are the people leading today's world. Another factor is religion in terms of non-domination. If we think about it, Buddhism is a very non-converting religion, a non-exploration, non-conquering religion, whereas the West basically went around the world to try to convert everybody. Another thing is most Asians are quite quiet in terms of the way they express themselves. I lived in Japan for 10 years and sort of knowing that me as an American was very much viewed as a very loud person in that country. So I learned how to be quiet most of the time. They even have a term for it called reading the air or kuki wo yomenai, which is having the antenna to read the room and not necessarily listening to people and what they say, but reading what is not being said in between the lines. Another factor is that Asians in general are much more insular than Westerners, meaning they're introverted. They're very much monocultural and homogenous. They only intermarry between themselves and less sort of mixing. But perhaps one of the biggest things, stumbling blocks that I've seen, having worked in both Japan, South Korea, Southeast Asia, and now in China, is this thing called critical thinking. Most of us in Asia are not taught to think differently. We're very much taught to accept and follow our own destiny and never challenge. Another sort of factor is actually language. Language in that there is no unifying language between all of us in Asia, right? It's a very, very diverse linguistic area of the world. So essentially, there's less dialogue and there's more closed societies as a result. But perhaps another sort of factor is this idea of groupthink, where we very much value the big we as opposed to the I and the individual. And this has succeeded very much as a strategy for Japan in the 70s, post-World War, when they basically rebuilt the entire country based out of Japan Inc., or running the whole country as a kind of corporation, where collectivism or coming together was what they needed to do to succeed. In fact, they have this saying that says, we must hammer the nail that sticks out, which essentially results in breeding everyone to be the same, right? Not standing out, being monocultural. They even have this thought of going with the flow. And some countries, such as South Korea, have perfected this idea of going with the flow or kind of collectivism by actually having artists or musicians who basically group together as one group rather than one individual. But perhaps one of the most sort of defining things about us as Asians is this emphasis on academics, right? I'm sure most of us, including you guys here in India, have obsessed towards science, technology, economics, and math as a kind of way to pave your own way of success. When I moved to the US in 1983, I thought I would leave that behind in the Philippines and sort of graduate onto a much more American way of thinking, but little did I know that actually my parents imported that with them into the United States. And you see that Asians in general, no matter where they go, carry the same sort of mentality. So it's much more psychographic than actually geographic. But the good thing is there's a lot of Asians around the world who are starting to inspire most of the youth around the world to actually step out of the STEM and actually pursue more creative endeavors with their lives. But what does all this mean to us here in the age of innovation? Well, it means this is a world that's changing faster than we can keep up with. A quote from Werner Vinge, who's basically a computer scientist and a futurist, who says, "We're on the edge of change comparable to the rise of human life on Earth." And if we plot out the human technological advancement in terms of time and how much we will develop in the next few years or so, it says that in 5 years we will be 32 times more advanced. In 10 years, 1,000 times more advanced. In 30 years, 1 billion times more advanced. But if you look at the chart in the 10-year line, it's actually pretty flat. And then in 40 years, 1 trillion times. In 50 years, 1 quadrillion times. Essentially, this is the technological tsunami that's going to be blinding us. Ray Kurzweil, who's an inventor, a futurist, and a Google thinker, says that he believes our civilization is going to be vastly more intelligent and spiritual in the decades to come. In human terms, what that really means is the great leap forward is going to be coming, and this is probably what it's going to look like. Doesn't it look awesome? But actually, for most of us, this is what it looks like. We have no clue. We have no idea. Why is that? I think for most of us, it's because our basis of how we think of the future can only be quantified based out of what we've lived through in the past. We can only compare what has happened before. We cannot have a vision of what will happen next. In fact, most of us probably won't know. What this means is that the law of accelerating returns is getting faster and faster. Technology is forcing us to evolve faster than we can even imagine. And it will become virtually impossible to predict the future. And with that much unpredictability, how do we create a future and invent what's next? How do we reinvent ourselves in the fourth industrial revolution when automation and AI takes over? People have already projected that in about 10 to 20 years, half of us will be redundant. But is that really all that bad, is my question. To me, automation is a necessary step towards how we will evolve as human beings. Something I read the other day that was pretty interesting that says 60% of our kids today are being educated for jobs that do not yet exist, that don't yet exist, which makes you question, how do we best prepare the next generation for a future we don't even know? If you think about it, our school system hasn't changed for the last 256 years since the Industrial Revolution. And basically, all of our schooling system back then, 256 years ago, prepares us for factory worker jobs, manual labor, and repetitive labor. But as technology amplifies our ability to learn, what and how we learn will also need to change. I saw this the other day online. It says, please don't confuse your Google search with my medical degree. And it's really quite telling in terms of what academics means in the age of artificial intelligence in our sort of human development chain. It forced us to ask, what do we actually need moving forward in the age of artificial intelligence, in the age of big data? The two biggest things that will impact our future. Well, if we stop to think and to actually plot the raw materials that shape the political and economic powers, in the agricultural age, it was land. He who owns the land controls the political and economic power. During the industrial age, it was iron. He who controls natural resources and controls the factories basically has the power of the day. In today's age of information, it's about data. He who controls data owns the data and can interpret the data will own the political and economic power. And this is a very influential man named Alec Ross, who is basically the man who defeated Hillary Clinton against Obama, right? Obama was able to win against Hillary because of this man. Basically, Hillary then hired him as her innovation advisor. So all his job was to go around the world and basically look into each country's innovation. So very, very good book to kind of read if you had the chance. But what he also predicted was this man, right? He who owns the data and can control the data can essentially do something as powerful as influencing which president in my country gets to win. But in the age of AI, what can it not learn? To me, it's about how to be human, how to play, how to imagine, how to invent, how to create. What really keeps me awake at night is this, my 6-year-old daughter, because her tomorrow will be very, very different, a tomorrow powered by limitless imagination. This is the thing called the Everything Maker, built in 1964. It's a toy that you could create anything with. This is the Thing Maker from last year. It's a 3D printed toy. Basically, you can sketch and draw whatever you imagine and basically put it into a machine such as this, and the next day be able to own and design your own toy. That's how far we've come. What will her tomorrow be like in 15 years? And where will Asia be in 2030? Some thoughts on how we could cultivate our next tomorrow. How to evolve ourselves in order to stay relevant. The first one is stay stupid, because for all the things that we know, there's so much that we don't know. And we always have to remember to think like a kid, basically questioning everything every 2 seconds. Pablo Picasso said that learn the rules like a pro so you can break them like an artist. The second is destroy hierarchies, because much of history and revolution is defined by youth. And as creative people, you all have the power to change the world. Find yourself, because to play is to find yourself. The greatest gift and responsibility we have to ourselves is to find our true purpose. And when you know who you are, you will know your purpose. Be that nail which is essentially always challenge the status quo and think different. And I think nobody said it better than this man. Embrace failure and invest in chances. We're sometimes trained to succeed that we sometimes forget how to fail. But actually, when one attempts to do the impossible and fails, you just realize that you've actually made a map towards success. To live a creative life means we have to lose our fear of being wrong. And we always have to be wrong. And that leads to being curious. If curiosity is what created the fire, what is our new fire in today's day and age? Albert Einstein says, I have no special talents, I'm only passionately curious. And that the important thing is to never stop questioning, because curiosity has its own reason for existing. Think beta and stay beta. And what this means is always have a beta mentality. The world is not static, and neither should we be static, because there actually is no finish line. It's never done. Create your own opportunities, and that just means that if it doesn't exist, make it happen for yourself, because action is the foundation of all success. And lastly, imagination and invention are actually the new weapons of mass disruption. History will always favor the brave, and you have to play to invent tomorrow today, because everything you can imagine is real, and everything exists waiting to be discovered. So I have 3 things I wanted to share with you from the stuff that we've been doing and how we sort of play every day to invent tomorrow. So this is the thing that hangs in my office every morning, which says, we exist to create the future. And that's really kind of what we're obsessed about, to create work that is scary to make because nobody has done it before. And we do that through the imaginative application of art and science into whether they be ideas, products, services, or even experiences. And our product is essentially brand storytelling for the new China in the connected age. But our bigger purpose is really, how do we co-create China's future? I'll show you the first one, which is a very good example of something that's very, very small, but you can actually make very, very big. This one is for brand Jordan, which is a basketball franchise by Michael Jordan. And this is to celebrate the 20th anniversary of Space Jam, which is a movie that Michael Jordan was part of. Right? So this one, we essentially hijacked WeChat, the equivalent of Facebook in China. And essentially, the Monstars, which is the characters within the movie, took over your page. And what you had to do was, you had to shoot against them, or you had to game against them in order to win back your actual WeChat page. So I'll show you the case film.
What's up, Doc? Monstars again? Let's get them.
So it's again about doing something very big even when you have a very, very small brief. The second one is for Shanghai Marathon, which happened last October. And it's a very good example of data storytelling. So I think most of you who have ran a marathon know it's not an overnight journey. It's about a 2 to 3 months journey training for the actual day itself. So what we did was we essentially created a new kind of storytelling, one where it would bind with your WeChat, or in your case, it's Facebook, and it would know who you are and your gender. And then we basically also tied it into Nike Plus, which essentially can track your data in terms of knowing when you run, whether it's day or night, how many kilometers you ran. And so pulling in that data. And then the next one is essentially being able to key in your actual race number, as well as put in your actual clothing that you're going to wear for the race. And lastly, your race result in terms of how much time did it actually take you to actually run it. So instead of creating an actual movie that would pump through YouTube, we actually created an actual WeChat storytelling that pulls in your data dynamically and plays it to you real time. So here's the case film for that.
At the 2016 Shanghai Marathon, Nike met runners at the finish line, letting them relive the race from the very start. My Soul Story. A mobile film powered by your Nike Plus data, retracing every stage of emotion throughout your running journey. From the day you committed to the race, to your runs against the sun and the night, to every grueling mile you train, to the moment you geared up. Relive your start. Relive your determination. Relive your struggle. Even your self-doubt. And finally, your victory. All told from the sole of your shoes. Over 30,000 racers relived their run, sharing 2,500 films in just 24 hours. My Soul Story lives on as a platform for future races across the nation, empowering each and every racer in China to relive their run.
So this last one, some of you are familiar with, but I'll show you how we've evolved it. This is for Nike Rise. It's a very good example of data science in terms of taking the data but actually interpreting it, right? So this is essentially for basketball in that the inspiration comes from being able to track the heat map of a player, right? And essentially the question we asked ourselves was, can data make us better basketball players? If you are able to record, store in-game information, the player movement, who you pass the ball to, how fast your actual motion is, where your actually shooting range is, right? And we were able to then create this thing called the House of Mamba, which is essentially the world's first reactive basketball court. It's a full-size LED basketball court that then trained the Rise athletes based out of Kobe Bryant's drills. So essentially digitizing all of Kobe's drills and enabling the normal everyday basketball Chinese player to be able to learn from Kobe himself. So we're using essentially AI, artificial intelligence, in terms of data tracking and analysis. And in the first year that we did it, we were using sort of the equivalent of iPhones to be able to track your data by putting it on your arms and on your legs. By the second year, the technology became a lot quicker and smaller. And imagine having Fitbits on both your wrists, your arms, your ankles, and your legs, right? And so it's essentially this idea of being able to track how you move and how you pass the ball, and enabling you to be able to move like Kobe, to think like Kobe, right? So in the second year, the way that we made it come to life was an actual real-time coaching tool. And here's what that looks like.
I think it's an incredible tool. I mean, it changes the game. It's very innovative. I think it changes the way the game can be taught and learned at a quicker pace. Draw on the iPad, it comes up on the court and show the players exactly what you want. Well, to be able to track all that type of data as a coach is very important. To be able to tell a player that they need to run faster, be able to track how many steps they take to get from one end of the court is very pertinent in our job. We're not trying to reinvent the game. We're trying to make it better and look better at any level. Something like this will make our players better every time they step on the court.
So why does any of this matter to us here today? A lot of people ask me what keeps me awake at night besides my 6-year-old girl. And it is this fact that 57% of the world's population of 4 billion exists in this circle that you see in front of you. When I was growing up in the Philippines in the first 12 years of my life, Asia back then was known as the part of the world that was not necessarily the best place to be born. But today, it's flipping on its head. The projections are that in about 13 years or so, the top 3 countries by economic dominance will be China, the USA, and you guys in India. This professor wrote a book from Lee Kuan Yew, Nanyang University. His name is Kishore Mahbubani, and he says, the world has undergone greater change in the last 30 years than it has in the last 300 years since Western expansion, which gave the West an economic upper hand. Now it's being reversed quicker than it emerged. We now live in a different world where the forces of history are rewriting itself, empowering our side of the world. For the first time in modern history, the East is not only catching up, but it's actually surpassing the West. A very beautiful chart that I saw from his book, which basically illustrates the era of Western expansion 370 years ago when the West basically conquered the rest of us in the world. And that took about 370 years to make. But if you look at modern day, since the 1970s till today, in the last 14 years, the rest of the world is now eating up the West. And what's exciting is that the next generation, the Generation Z, will be the ones in power and in control. Basically, the Asians that we send abroad to study in both Europe and in the United States are basically coming back into the respective countries and enabling the American dream to replicate and to happen in places like India, in China, in South Korea. If we look at the top nationalities of people who studied in the United States, the top 3 nations are China, India, and South Korea. 50% of the people studying university in the US are essentially Asians. There's a determination not to be dependent on foreign know-how and to reclaim the country's historic role as a global leader in technology, says this professor from, about China from Nottingham University. And in fact, the US science and engineering doctorate degrees, the top 4 countries are China, India, South Korea, and Taiwan. And what that means is that the age of innovation is actually going to be a Sino-Korean time, a time in which China, Korea, and India will be the centers, the epicenters of actual innovation. So our collective challenge here today is how do we reinvent Asia through innovation? Transform Asia from a very manufacturing mentality to an innovation philosophy. Because when we begin to innovate, we will in turn influence the rest of the world. We're at a very golden moment in Asia's modern day history. the Asian creative revolution, where creativity is needed to power us forward. Creativity is the engine behind the age of innovation. And that just means that we have to take a step back and rethink everything, and probably consider that the things that we know are probably not what we need to know moving forward. So the normal rules no longer apply. So we have to question everything. We have to rethink, reimagine in order to reinvent ourselves, in order to reinvent Asia. And we have to create work that evolves who we are. Rewrite the rules to write our next chapter. I wanted to end with a quote. Actually, it says, we have to play to invent tomorrow and become part of history. I wanted to end with a quote from the founder of AKQA, Ajaz, who basically says, the most powerful force in the universe is not technology, it's our imagination. But we have to essentially give ourselves to the present to create the future. Thank you so much.
Sir, requesting you to
Okay.
please take a seat. Imagination indeed, very insightful session. One more round of applause for Mr. Eric Cruz. It's now time for the question and answer session. May I call upon Head of Marketing Facebook, Sunita GR, to moderate the same.
Hi, Eric. So thanks, Eric, for coming all the way from LA. It was a really insightful session and a bit scary as well, you know, when we have to imagine the future and look at this dark, sort of unimaginable world at this point of time. But hopefully you'll be with us in the evening where you'll be able to answer your question. Are Indians creative? Yes? We will be, awarding some of our good creative innovative work in this evening, and hopefully you should be able to see.
Looking forward to it.
So I had a few questions for you. I'd really like to point on the tsunami of future. How do you think automation is going to take over creativity? Is it going to make us all redundant?
No, it's a very good question in that I think automation is a very good thing, in my opinion. I think it's going to get rid of us doing very, very menial tasks. Things like sketching something out. I think there will come a point where we can imagine a scenario, whether it be for a TV spot or an actual idea, and our thoughts will be able to be rendered in real time by a machine. And I think I also kind of see it to a point where we could use artificial intelligence to actually brainstorm and concept with, right? In terms of being able to pull data that we may have forgotten, that we may not be thinking about, and it may be to a point where it can help enhance and aid our creative abilities. So I think it's actually, for me, quite an exciting thing and not necessarily a negative or a downing thing.
Yeah, it just feels a bit scary there. You've worked with a lot of advertisers and clients on the other side. What has been your challenge? You see the future, others may not. So how do you work with them and ensure that what you want to achieve as a creator and what the advertisers want to achieve? How do you strike the balance, and how do you keep pushing the boundaries of creativity and innovation?
I think to me, there's one ingredient that I've found anywhere you work in the world, whether it's in the US or Europe or in many parts of Asia, and that is about trust. And winning the client's trust that you know their brand better than they do, but also you're in it for the long run in terms of being able to actually take what they have and be able to express that in a much bigger way than they could inside their own company. So I think to me, it's about gaining their trust and being ahead in terms of the learning curve of bringing to them new things they may not have thought about. A lot of the stuff that we're experimenting and exploring, avenues that have to deal with AI, things like data science, those are all things that we ourselves have to constantly explore, research, and sort of bring to the table when we're presenting the ideas themselves. And sometimes most clients will actually not know what it is that you're trying to do up until you've made it. So there's a lot of risk involved. So I think my hat goes off to the clients that we are able to sort of do those kind of things with.
Yeah. I guess we need to be all brave together and embrace the future. I'm going to take a few questions from the audience here. Okay, here's one from Seema. She asked, there's no dearth of talent in the country. However, the industry suffers from the right pool of creative people. What do you think we need to do to stay relevant and stay out of, do things out of the box and think out of the box?
I think it goes back to some of the stuff that I was talking about earlier, which is making sure, I think the most important ingredient that I find when I look for people to collaborate with is this ingredient of curiosity, right? If curiosity killed the cat, I think curiosity is also the one ingredient that will enable us to explore something new, to discover what hasn't been done yet, to be able to see the things that most people probably couldn't see.
Yeah. That's something for us to all think about. So here's one question with respect to China. This is from Puneet. And he says that China has China has had the image of producing mass quality products, which has, inadvertently affected the image of China. So how's the advertising fraternity partnering and helping this to change this image of China globally?
I think it's a very good question, and that's sort of our purpose, right? I think China itself as a country is in a very special moment. Obviously, with President Trump being elected in the US, we kind of foresee the downfall of the United States, where I'm from. And I think it brings a very interesting opportunity for countries like China. I think if we look at how Japan has reinvented itself in the 1970s and essentially learned from the US in terms of how to create culture and how to create brands to symbolize your country, they've also done that, and they've actually perfected it, creating brands like Toyota, like Honda, and then in the 90s, South Korea followed that same model, right? With the Jaebols or the sort of family-owned companies, creating things like Samsung or Hyundai. And I think now it's kind of coming of age for China itself in that there has not yet been a sort of global Chinese brand. And I feel in the next 5 years, it's going to happen. In fact, we're working with some new startup companies, which we hope to be the first Chinese companies to be recognized on a global scale. And I think that's what's really exciting. And I think I have the same sort of hope and wish for India itself, in that I wish that India is probably going to reach a breakthrough, especially with people like Sundar Pichai and Google and all of the sort of energy that's happening there, coming back into here and actually rethinking what should India stand for in the global scale, in the global scheme of things.
Yeah, so that's fascinating. Are you working with any of the Indian companies right now?
Not yet, but we do have an office here in India, although it's not yet a kind of creative outlet. It's more sort of back end.
Yeah. That's fascinating. One last question. This is from Mayank. He wants to ask, do you think technology is a hindrance for creativity?
Technology
is a hindrance for creativity?
No, I think, so when I was in school in 1990, right, I went to university, I started in 1990, and this thing called a Macintosh first came out, and you could actually design with it, right? And before that, everything was designed by hand. And if we look at the same trajectory of how Apple as a brand has enabled and empowered us to be many, many different things. So if I was interested in photography, in filmmaking, in coding, in interactivity, as well as graphic design, as well as illustration, I could explore all those because of this thing called a Macintosh. So I think, to me, that is very much a small but big sort of movement that happened 20, 25 years ago. But I think things like artificial intelligence and automation is going to be the next frontier of how we will amplify our creative ability moving forward.
Yeah, I remember back in the days, all the print ads used to cut from newspapers or, just put out a print ad together.
Yeah.
There was no technology.
Yep.
But yeah, interesting. So what we need you to do is to pick a favorite out of the 3 questions that I asked, which is from the audience, and they get a prize, which is sponsored by Yes Bank.
Okay. I think I'm going to pick the last one.
Yeah.
Number
Can we
5.
have Mayank from DS Group on the stage, please?
Mayank is the winner of our best question in this session. Ladies and gentlemen, Goafest 2017 is going cashless in support of Remonetize India. That prize is sponsored by Yes Bank. Mayank? Is Mayank in the house?
Maya seems like an artificially intelligent
He asked
being.
the question and made a run for it, is it?
Maya just tweets.
All right, moving on. Request Sunita to please present Mr. Cruz with the memento, a token of our gratitude for that session. May we have the memento, please, on stage? There you have it. Just to remind you, you have 3 more chances to win best questions, so download the app and ask away. Thank you very much, Mr. Cruz and Sunita, for moderating that.
Thank you so much, you guys.